Climate change is a hotly debated issue in America. In a politically right-leaning state, it is not difficult to find people who are skeptical of climate change.
Know what's causing climate change on this planet, and the idea of spending trillions and trillions of dollars to try and reduce CO2 emissions is not the right course for us.
I believe that the Al Gore defined global warming is a farce.
What is the impact of man on cataclysmic global warming and climate change? And I think it's exaggerated in many instances.
If climate change is happening here in Utah, I wonder how it will affect our two Great Lakes. Salt Lake City was founded by Mormon pioneers in 1847 when Brigham Young, the leader of the Mormon Church at the time, said this is the right place. Shortly after Brigham Young settled the Salt Lake Valley, named after the Great Salt Lake, some pioneers settled in Provo, near Utah Lake. How great are these two lakes? According to the National Atlas of the United States, by surface area, Utah Lake is the 36th largest lake, and the Great Salt Lake is the 6th, only behind the Great Lakes in the Northeast. It is not difficult for me to understand that Utahns are dependent on these two bodies of water, that Utah Lake helps with agriculture and is a recreational hub for many Utahns, and that the Great Salt Lake was more than a tourist attraction for those visiting out of state. But I felt that, like climate change, to so many people, they existed primarily as an abstract thought. What was my relationship to them? Why should I personally care about their fate? And with my hopefully newfound interest in them, what is the reality of the impact of climate change for them? I decided to visit these two lakes. It had not been long since I'd last visited Utah Lake. I was there only months before, in May, to compete in a triathlon there. One thing that came to my mind about Utah Lake over the last couple of years was the partial closures of the lake due to algae blooms. I decided to look up if there were any and where I might find one. To my surprise, the same place that the triathlon had been, Lincoln Beach, was closed now due to an algae bloom, so that's where I headed. Cyanobacteria, or more simply referred to as blue-green algae, creates a neurotoxin that can affect people and animals. Symptoms of its consumption are headaches, nausea, fever, sore throat, dizziness, stomach cramps, diarrhea, abdominal pain, vomiting, muscle aches, mouth ulcers, and blistering of the lips. When I arrived, at first glance it looked the same as when I had been there a couple months ago. Then I got to the docking area, and I was surprised to see the color difference. What it had looked like normal lake water a couple of months ago had a definite green look to it now. While it did not look as awful as some of the pictures I had seen online, it was still surprising. I took some time to reflect on the size of Utah Lake. From Lincoln Beach looking north, it took over the horizon. It is the third largest freshwater lake west of the Mississippi River. On my way home, looking at the fields of crops on the south side of the lake, I realized that for many people, that lake provided a way of life for thousands of people for hundreds of years. Whether it was fishing, boating, farming, or swimming, that body of water had enriched people's lives. It was more tangible to me now. I was surprised when I came home to find out that only 2 years ago, in 2016, over 100 people called into poison control with symptoms of blue-green algae sickness. This also left farmers searching for clean water in the middle of their growing season. The Guardian article mentioned pollution as a factor, but I wondered if climate change also played a role. The EPA has a page dedicated to this that lists several climate change factors that increase the likelihood of blooms. Warming water, changes in salinity, higher carbon dioxide, changes in rainfall, and coastal upswelling are listed as factors. I decided to next turn my focus to the Great Salt Lake. The Salt Air was a building that I was familiar with as I had gone to several concerts there a few years ago. Salt Air has a unique history which is interesting. The building that I had known as Salt Air was actually the third rendition of the building. The first was built in 1893 and was a huge destination spot for both locals and tourists. After a 30-year run, it burned down. Attempts to rebuild it were impeded by the World Wars and the Great Depression, until the second rendition was opened in 1958. It met the same fate as the first, burning down in 1970. The third one was completed in 1993. Both new rebuilds had been moved further west in an attempt to be nearby the lake water. I wanted to see where the third one is now in relation to the lake. I was shocked just how far back the lake had receded from its shoreline when Saltaire was built. It was back significantly from even the last time I had been there. It took several minutes to walk the distance just to get to the water. In order to ascertain whether things were as bad as they looked, I met with Jaimi Butler, a specialist on the Great Salt Lake with the Salt Lake Institute at Westminster College.
I'm Jaimi Butler. I run Great Salt Lake Institute at Westminster College. Great Salt Lake is weird. You know, it's salty and it's smelly, and you know, things are pickled along the shoreline after they die, and it doesn't meet everybody's expectations. We have this expectation of lake houses and, you know, boat houses and like lots of development and boardwalks, and that's not how Great Salt Lake is. But it doesn't diminish how greatly it affects both our economy and our health and our human ecosystems, and it's super important. This is a hub of bird activity in the western United States, and over 10 million birds come here every year for the resources that the lake and the surrounding environments provided, and we would lose a lot of that. And not only would the birds not come here, but huge populations, like I'll use the example of eared grebes. Over 90% of eared grebe populations come to Great Salt Lake at some point in their life, like the entire world's population. We wouldn't just lose grebes here, we would lose grebes all around the world. For people directly, we would be extremely affected. There's going to be dust storms. Our air quality is already not the best in the world. In fact, it's often the worst in the world. So dust that comes off of these lake beds can be very toxic and very dangerous for humans and cause lots of human health effects. So we would have dust storms. The lake provides for lake effect storms. So there's this like lake effect that happens because of the interaction of the lake and the air currents and all sorts of different things. But and even though maybe that's 5 to 12% of the snowpack, it's pretty big. So not just losing snowpack, but you remember there's dust coming off the lake bed, and that dust coming off the lake bed will cover the snow and will also melt that snow quicker as there's kind of a darker color on it. Great Salt Lake provides lots of jobs. So in 2012 they did an economic study of Great Salt Lake, and the lake and ecosystem services provide $1.3 billion annually to the state of Utah. I mean, there's economic, there's health effects, there's effects to our human ecosystem. Because of the water that we've taken out of the Bear River and out of the Jordan River that we've diverted for agriculture and other human uses, we've shrunk the lake by 40% on average. So, I mean, almost in half is like what the lake is, just because of diversions of water, and that doesn't take into account climate change. So we haven't really seen decreased precipitation. We've seen increased temperatures, which would increase evaporation rates, but we have seen the same average precipitation over that 150 years. There's lots of proposals for other water diversions that would also exaggerate the issue and shrink Great Salt Lake. You know, there's a lot of historical references where we've had experiences drying up salt lakes in different parts of the world that we can go and look at. One of the closest ones is the Owens Lake. And, you know, it was a big environmental catastrophe. They took all of the water out. They diverted all of the water from going into Owens Lake and took it into the city of LA. Now the lake bed is dry. It causes extreme dust storms, and they've had to remediate the problem by covering the entire lake bed with rocks, and it's cost more than $2 billion, and 15% of everybody's water bill in the city of LA goes to remediation. And just remember, Owens Lake is 110 square miles. Great Salt Lake is 1,700 square miles. If I were to give recommendations to policymakers, I mean, right now we're really thinking about water in Great Salt Lake because the lake is fairly resilient. I mean, it's used to getting lots of inputs in like salt and minerals, and it's adapted to that. Really, what's going to imperil Great Salt Lake is not getting enough water. Our water laws were created before Utah was even a state. They don't reflect the changes that have happened over the past 100 or 150 years. Yeah. And it doesn't allow, I mean, they literally do not allow for conservation of water. Yeah. While we don't always see all of the things that the lake provides for us, it's there. And if we lose it, we don't get it back. They didn't recreate Owens Lake and fill it back up with water. They fixed it by putting rocks on the bottom of the lake. So I would say we all need to be very aware of how much it impacts us and how much we impact Great Salt Lake.
Yeah. All right, I think that covers everything I wanted
Awesome.
to cover. Thank you so much again.
Totally.
Thank you.
After the interview with Jaimi, we continued to talk for a while. We talked about what risks exist to the Great Salt Lake, about Pink Floyd, the lake's seasonal flamingo, and how she hoped that pelicans living that breed at the lake could become the mascot for saving it. Then she asked me about this project that I'm working on, with what I can only describe as a reserved and distressed hope. She is concerned about the future of the lake, that if the younger generation doesn't take an interest in the lake, it could be lost with and to Utah's growing population. Which brings me to the point of this project. Wherever we are, with whatever part of nature we are dealing with, we have a choice. And that choice is to either allow the world to go on as it is now and deal with the effects of climate change, which will mean the loss of natural resources, species of animals, and the world in the sense that it has been known for generations. Or we can take ownership of how we behave and become stewards of the incredible habitats and planet that we were born into. That choice is ours, and it is one that needs to be made soon. Thank you for watching.